Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. If you're new here, my name's Jennifer, and today we're going to be talking all about planting a fall garden. Now today doesn't seem like a day that we'd be thinking about fall gardening. I mean, it's towards the end of June. I mean, we've barely really gotten into summer. We're not even really into this full swing of the summer garden yet. I've just barely started harvesting my summer produce. I have yet to get my first tomato or cucumber or zucchini. But despite all that, it is time in most parts of the country to really start thinking about a fall garden. Now there's a lot of things that I'm going to direct sow in the garden later in the fall, and those we don't really need to worry about quite yet, although it is still good to be planting. But I have quite a few plants, mostly brassicas, that need a little bit of a head start before going in the garden, and today that is primarily what we're going to be talking about. Now, when you're planting your fall garden, the first thing you need to know is the estimated last frost date for your area. Now in my area, if I go online and do an internet search, the internet tells me my estimated last frost date is about October 5th. In my experience, since I started gardening and really kind of keeping track of that, it's usually a little bit later. I want to say between the 10th and the 15th, some years even later than that. But just for the sake of playing it safe, we are going to plan on the 5th. So in my area, we have a little over 100 days until my first frost. And so that means that any plant that is going to be killed by frost needs to have completed its harvest before 100 days in order for me to get a harvest out of it. So for example, I don't have enough time to start something like a tomato or a pepper that's going to have a really long growing season. I do have time to start another planting of some things like bush beans, some fast growing cucumbers and zucchinis, and so I might put a few more of those into my summer garden as other plants start to kind of come to the end of their harvest cycle. But today we're going to be focusing on the plants that we're going to be starting to get ready to transplant into our fall garden. So as I mentioned, that's mostly brassicas. So I have here 4 types of kale that I'm going to be starting. Kale will go pretty far into the winter for me as long as I give it some protection from snow. Once your daylight hours become short enough, your plants aren't really going to grow anymore. But with a little bit of protection, you will be able to keep them in a harvestable state. Some of your really hardy plants like kale, you'll be able to keep in a harvestable state for a while. We'll talk about that in a later video. But for the purposes of this video, just know that we have plenty of time to start kale. I'm also going to be starting 3 kinds of cabbage for the fall garden. I'm going to be starting amazing cauliflower, and I'm going to be starting 3 kinds of broccoli. If you saw my garden tour, you likely remember that one of the broccoli varieties that I started this year was listed as a fall growing variety. I tried it in the spring and it did not do that well. So I'm going to give that one another try for the fall and see how that is. So a lot of these brassica plants that we mentioned, in a lot of areas you could in theory just direct seed those in your garden. There are a couple reasons why I'm starting them in pots early rather than direct seeding them. One is that it's been my experience that those types of plants in my garden tend to do better if I actually put them in the garden a little bit later when they have a few weeks of growth under their belt, kind of. They're a little more resistant to the pests at that point. And even though I am going to be growing these outside on my deck, I'm not going to be starting them in my house. For some reason, the pests just don't seem to find them that much on my deck. The other reason I'm going to be starting these in pots rather than in the garden is that I don't have the space ready for them yet. The places where they're going to grow in the fall are occupied by my other summer crops right now. So we are going to give these probably about a 4 to 6 week head start in these pots here and transplant them out into the garden probably around the end of July. The other thing that we're going to be planting today is not exactly for my fall garden, but we are also going to be succession sowing lettuce for my summer garden. And the lettuces that we're going to be growing today are types that are more resistant to heat. These lettuces are more willing to grow in the summer heat than other lettuces are. Now they're still going to struggle a little bit, but I have a better chance of getting a little bit of a harvest out of them before they bolt. The lettuces, we'll be starting them out here, and I'm going to be growing them inside my house. Lettuce does not like to germinate in the heat, and it does not like to grow in the heat. So we're going to give those about a 4-week head start in my house before bringing them out. At that point, they should be a little bit stronger and a little bit more able to withstand growing outside. Now the lettuce varieties that I have a summer lettuce mix. So this is a mix of lettuce that was put together by this seed company, in this case Fedco Seeds. They've put together a variety of kind of heat resistant lettuces, so those will be more likely to succeed in the summer heat. Also buttercrunch lettuce. It's been my experience that buttercrunch does pretty well in most growing conditions. It does not like the extreme heat, as no lettuce does, but it tends to do pretty well for me in the cold and pretty well for me in the summer. So we're going to be growing a little bit of that. The next lettuce that we're going to be growing is Marvel of 4 Seasons. Now it's listed on here, I think it's the French version of that name, which I'm not going to try to pronounce, but in English it's Marvel of 4 Seasons. So that is, I think it's a butterhead type of lettuce, green with a little bit of red to it, and that is a really good, reliable lettuce. We'll be growing that one as well, and also red salad bowl. So it's been my experience that all of these lettuces do better in the summer heat than most other lettuces that I have. So we'll be starting some of those, and then in probably about a month or so, I'll be starting another succession sowing of lettuce, and that will be more winter type varieties that we want to last longer into the fall. But for today, we'll be doing the summer lettuces. So I also have here a collection of seeds that I am planning to direct sow in the garden for fall. It will be a little bit later in the season before I get to these, but I'll just show you what some of them are. I have a few types of pak choi here. I have a Shanghai green choi. We have a purple pak choi and a joy choi pak choi, which is a really dark green with white ribs. We have tatsoi, which is another type of Asian green. It's kind of similar to spinach with maybe a little more of a bite to it. It's pretty good. This one, I am not sure how to pronounce. I'm just gonna put that up there so that you can see that. But this, I believe, is a newly developed green, and I grew this one last fall and I liked it, so I'm going to grow that again. We'll be trying this one this year. This is a winter choi, Chinese yellow heart. That looks really pretty to me, and I'm excited to grow it. I have a spinach here. I have a few types of arugula. I have mosh, although I'm not sure if I'm going to need to direct sow that or not. If you saw my last garden tour, you saw my other mosh plants that went to seed in my garden. So there should be lots of mosh that kind of volunteers in my garden, but just in case, I have some seeds for that. I might give dill a try this fall. I haven't really tried dill as a fall crop, but I'm going to give it a try and see what happens. It doesn't do as well in the heat of summer, and so I'm hoping I'll be able to get a little more harvest in the fall. Radishes. I just have a few seeds here, but I have some radishes in my garden going to seed, so I should be able to collect a few more from them. I've never really been successful with carrots in the past, but we're going to give this variety a try. It looked like a really fun and pretty variety, so we're going to try this and see if we can be successful. And sugar snap peas. I have a couple packets of these. I've never really been able to get the timing right with sugar snap peas in the fall. It kind of seems to go from summer to really cold pretty fast here. So, and probably actually the bigger issue is the daylight hours, but we're going to give those a try. Pretty much as soon as I rip my other sugar snap peas out, we're going to put these in and we're going to see what happens. I'll let you know how those go. So anyway, and then in addition to these, I'll have more lettuces that I probably will direct sow, possibly a couple other things. I'm not 100% sure yet, but I'll be direct sowing all these in probably a couple months. We'll be putting those out in the garden, maybe sometime in August. So one other kind of experiment that I'm trying in the fall garden this year are these Roma tomatoes. Now this is definitely a summer crop. These are not frost hardy at all. As soon as there's a frost, these will die. But I already have some started on my deck. I think I showed those to you in the last garden tour. They're little seedlings right now, but I have 10 little plants started. And my plan is, in a couple weeks, it's going to be time to rip out all my garlic. Well, not to rip it out. In a couple weeks, it's going to be time to harvest all the garlic, and then I'm going to have that space there. So when that comes out, we're going to try putting a few tomatoes in. These are determinate tomatoes, which means that they will ripen their entire crop pretty much at once. And so my hope with these is that I'll be able to harvest some of these later in the fall, and those will be primarily the tomatoes that we'll be canning and preserving. So that's a complete experiment. I have heard of a few other people doing something similar to that with mixed amounts of success. So we will try that. We will see how it goes. I think that's going to be a really fun experiment. So here I have seeds for a few summer plants. These are plants that have a really quick days to maturity, which means that I can sow these in the ground and get a really quick harvest from them. So I'm going to be using these plants as I have space in my garden. As I pull things out, I'm going to replace them with these to try to get a really quick harvest. So we have Provider green beans. Those are a 50-day maturity, so that's pretty fast. That's less than 2 months. I've got a few kinds of cucumbers here. I'm not sure if I'll be able to get this one in or not, but I might give it a try. This is a Minnesota midget. It's a little mini cantaloupe, and it's got 65 to 70 days to maturity. So that might be a bit of a stretch, but we'll see what happens. We may give that a try. I've got a couple zucchinis here, a couple more cucumbers. So again, that's all going to be kind of an experiment. We'll see how all that goes. Cucumbers kind of tend to kind of finish up their life cycle as it gets really hot. Usually sometime in August, my cucumbers start to really struggle. So I may try to put some new ones in again then and see if we can get a few before October. We'll see what happens with that. So I just want to say a couple things about how we're starting these seeds. In this tray here, rather than seed starting mix, I have potting soil. Now, I've chosen to use potting soil for a couple of reasons. One is simply that is what I had on hand. For the most part though, I do start my seeds in potting soil because I have never really found a seed starting mix that I'm really happy with. I mean, to be honest, I'm usually not all that happy with commercial potting soil either. I usually make my own. Right now, this is purchased potting soil because I did not have the materials on hand to make my own, and I didn't want to wait to get those materials and make my own. It was easier to just pick up a bag of potting mix from my local home improvement store. So that's what we have here. Now, the two main differences that I have found between potting soil and seed starting mix is that seed starting mix is a little bit lighter and fluffier because when little seedlings first germinate, they can have trouble kind of working their roots through really dense soil. And so if you are using potting mix, what you want to do is kind of go through. So you see here, some of these little like twigs and things in here. You kind of want to pick some of this stuff out. So just pick out the bigger chunks that you see to make this a little bit lighter and fluffier for your seeds. The other primary difference between potting soil and seed starting mix that I found is that potting soil usually has some sort of nutrients in it. Seed starting mix really does not have nutrients in it. The idea is that you start your seeds for the first few days of their life, they get their nutrients from the seed itself. The seed contains enough nutrients for their first few days of life. And then after that, you're going to either need to fertilize them or you'll transplant them into a container with potting mix in it. I find it easier to skip that step and just start them in potting mix right from the beginning. Now, I have had some times where some more finicky seeds don't germinate as well, but for the most part, this is still what I prefer to do. You'll see that I'm going to be using some of these seed tags here. This says cayenne on it. I am obviously not sowing cayenne peppers at this point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make each row be a certain type. I'll just put one label at the end of the row, and then we'll put 8 types of brassicas in here. So the first one that we're going to do is solstice broccoli. This is the broccoli that I mentioned really struggled in the summer. So we're going to give this one a try for the fall and we'll see how it does. So I like to, on my tags here, I like to write my variety in both a Sharpie because it's easier to see and a pencil because I find that it lasts longer. So we'll be putting solstice broccoli here. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to put 2 seeds in each. I'm just going to put 2 seeds in each container in case one of them doesn't germinate. And then if I'm really ambitious, rather than thinning them out, I can transplant one of them. That's probably not going to happen, not because I won't get to it, but because I won't have the space. Now, if you'll notice with my container here, this basically, it has a tray on the bottom. You see it has a solid tray. It has this partitioned tray that holds all of the pots, and it has this solid tray down here. Basically, the partition tray is kind of a luxury. I really like having it, but it's not necessary. But because I'm going to be keeping these seedlings on my deck rather than in my house, I like to have them in a tray that you can water them. I mean, honestly, I do that even when I'm starting them in my house. It just makes life so much easier. But it's especially important since these are going to be outside. When they're outside, the sun is going to basically dry up the moisture in the pot so much more quickly. And especially for little seedlings that are first getting started, they have a really small root system. If their soil dries out, they can die almost instantly. So it's really important to make sure that your seedlings stay watered, and that's harder to do outside. So if you keep them in a tray that always has a little bit of water on the bottom, that is going to allow them to take water as they need it. I just find it a lot easier to keep my seedlings watered that way. Another thing is that it makes watering so much easier. Rather than having to water each individual pot, you just fill the bottom tray with water and the seedlings just take the water that they need. So you definitely do not need to have a fancy tray like this, but I do recommend that if you're going to be starting seeds in cups like this, inside or outside, put them in some kind of tray that can hold water, some kind of solid tray without holes in the bottom that can hold water. That will make watering your seedlings so much easier. Now with most brassicas, which is what we're planting in this tray here, you're going to put your seeds, I don't know if you can see it there, about 1/4 inch deep. It will say on your seed packet when you get your seeds to put them about 1/4 inch deep. And you can see how small these little seeds are. So if you happen to have seeds that didn't come in a seed packet, or for whatever reason you don't have instructions for them, the general rule of thumb is that seeds go in the dirt about twice as deep as the seeds are wide. Now these seeds you saw are very tiny, so about 1/4 inch is about right for them. If we're planting a bigger seed, like for example a snap pea seed or a bean seed, a zucchini seed, those go a little bit deeper. But for these tiny brassica seeds, 1/4 inch works just right. So we're going to be trying this amazing cauliflower again. I tried to plant this past spring. Something happened to all my seedlings in the house. They all came up and looked great, and then they all died. I'm not sure what happened. So we're going to be giving this cauliflower a try again. Hopefully it does a little bit better in the fall for us. Oh, see, here's a little twig here. We want to get that out of here. We don't want that interfering with our seed germination. So let me know if you've grown brassicas in the fall before, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, any of that. Do you direct sow them in your garden, or do you start them in pots ahead of time? And if you start them in pots, do you do them outside like I'm doing, or do you do it in your house or greenhouse? I'm just curious because here in Connecticut, our summer is not that hot, and so I'm able to start these outside on my deck. That saves me from having to do the hardening off process later, and so I prefer that. I think it's less of a shock for the plants. But I know in some places in the country, like in the South, it's way too hot to do that. You can't even get these seeds to germinate outside. So just, if you would just share your experience and let me know what part of the country you're in, I'd be really curious to hear how people in different parts of the country do this. All right, so let's get back to sowing seeds. The next one is Eastern Magic broccoli. This is the other broccoli that I trialed this year, and I am much more happy with this one for spring growing. So I'm gonna give it a try in the fall as well and see how it does in the fall compared to the other broccoli varieties. The last broccoli variety that I'm trying this fall is Waltham 29 broccoli. Part of the reason I'm trying this one is because it's open pollinated, and I'm trying to move more into growing more open pollinated seeds as opposed to hybrids. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with growing hybrids. I grow hybrids and I like many of them. But just from a sustainability point of view, I really like the idea of growing plants that I can then save the seeds from and know what I'm going to get. If you save the seeds from a hybrid, it's not a sure thing. You don't really know exactly what kind of plant you're going to get. I mean, it would still be like a broccoli plant or whatever, but it could be completely different from the parent broccoli that you started with. Okay, so we have this tray all planted, so I'm going to grab our lettuce tray and we're going to get started planting that. Now you can see with the lettuce tray here, I'm just reusing cheap 6-packs from a nursery. So these are just not even great quality. You can see these are just what I had purchased plants from in a nursery. Some of these I've reused for several years. And I'm just going to be starting my lettuce in these. And I have a few of these bigger 4-packs as well. I'm going to be starting my kale in those. So one thing I forgot to mention when you're starting seeds, I find it a lot easier to work with pre-moistened soil. You can see how the soil is damp here. Now you don't want it to be soggy, but you want it to be moistened so that it's a lot easier to have your soil wet to start with rather than plant your seeds and then try to water them in after you've planted them. So just to show you guys that you don't need to be incredibly precise when it comes to planting your seeds, look at this one here. It says to plant 1/8 of an inch deep. This one, this is a different variety, but it's still lettuce, 1/4 of an inch deep. And I don't think there's really much difference when it comes to the growing preferences of these lettuce varieties. I think that it's really just the seed companies have different preferences for it. And if you're anywhere around 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch deep for your lettuce seeds, that's going to be fine. Basically, the planting depth is recommended just because you want your seeds to be planted deep enough that they're not going to dry out before they have the chance to germinate, but you don't want them to be so deep that they run out of stored energy before reaching the surface. Once the plants reach the surface, their green leaves will see the sun and they'll make more energy. So you just don't want to use up the stored energy in the seed before that happens. That's why you have a planting depth guideline. But you don't need to be super precise. You don't need to get out your ruler and measure exactly. Just as long as you're in that general ballpark, you should be fine. So I can assure you guys, I'm not a super precise person. And so if precision was required for success, I would have no success because I just don't have the patience to be that precise. So same thing with the lettuces as when we planted our brassicas. We're just going to put 2 seeds per container. I'm just going to kind of very lightly cover these with about as small of an amount of dirt as I can manage. Now you saw that I have these lettuces just in these little 6-packs. I don't have these in a nice tray like I do my brassicas, but you can see I do still have a bottom tray. That's going to allow me to still be able to bottom water my plants, and that's going to also make it a lot easier for them, a lot easier for me to water them, I should say, and help me to keep them from drying out. But as I mentioned, these lettuces I'm actually going to be bringing inside my house. These will be much less likely to germinate if I have them out in the hot sun on my deck. So these lettuces I am succession sowing for summer, but when it comes to my lettuces that I'm going to be starting for fall and winter harvest, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to start those inside my house as well and then bring them out. Now that does have the drawback of meaning that I will need to harden them off, which isn't the best. But when it comes to lettuce, it's probably realistically, unless you live in a place with very cool summers, it's realistically your only option to be able to start lettuce seeds in the summer. So you can see here, this is from the summer lettuce mix. You can see there's just different colors of lettuce seeds in there, just from the different varieties that they have. I always like to grow a mix along with a few separate varieties that I know do well in the summer. I get a separate packet of the ones that are my favorites so that I make sure I get a lot of those. But the mix always has a few new varieties in it too, and it's fun to, now of course you don't know what they are, but it's kind of fun to try something new. The downside of a mix is that if you have a lettuce in there that you really love, you don't know what it is, and so your chances of being able to find it and grow it again are a lot smaller. Now when it comes to these kales here, we're going to plant these the same way that we planted the other brassicas, about a 1/4 inch deep. And we're going to put 2 to a cell. So I've got scarlet kale, which I love to grow in the fall. It's pretty year-round, but once it gets colder and these leaves get touched with a little bit of frost, they turn like a deeper reddish purple, and it's just so pretty. If you grow it in the spring and summer, it'll be green with a little bit of a purple tint to it, but if you grow it in the fall and winter, it's like a solid purple. It's really pretty. Russian red kale is a favorite too. It's always a good one. Then there's dazzling blue kale, which is like a lacinato type kale. I think that might be my favorite kale, and you know, I don't know, it's one of my favorites, and it's one of the prettiest too. So I always grow that one, both spring and fall. I also grew, I don't think I showed you, in the other tray where I grew the other brassicas, I also put some blue curled Scotch kale, which is kind of like the classic kale, like the ones you'd be most likely to find at the grocery store with its big curly, like dark green blue leaves. That one's a really good one too. Okay, so I think that's about all we have for today. We'll talk more about fall gardening as the season goes on and as the fall gardening season really gets closer. But one thing you do want to know, if you are thinking about doing a fall garden, you want to get your seeds now. A lot of seed companies are kind of starting to sell out of a lot of seeds right now. It's actually a good time to buy because some companies are having a lot of sales right now. But it's not going to be too long before your local like home improvement store, your local nursery, places like that where you may be able to get seeds locally. It's not going to be too long before they stop carrying seeds. I know the last time I was in like my local Home Depot, all their seeds were marked down maybe 20% or something, and they're starting to clear those seeds out now. So if you want to get seeds for a fall garden, go ahead and do that now. There are still places that you can get seeds online, although your selection will probably be less. But you want to make sure that you have those lined up, because depending on your area of the country and depending on when your last frost date is, now is the time to start a lot of those seeds for plants that take a little bit longer, like brassicas. If you are in a warmer area of the country than me, you probably have a little bit longer. Here where I am in Connecticut, we have fairly early winters, and so I really need to get a jump on starting my brassicas that take a little bit longer. I still have time for some things like peas and lettuces and spinach and other things like that. I'm not going to worry about doing those yet. But it is still the time to be thinking about that. So let me know in the comments, what are you most excited to grow for fall? Are you doing a fall garden this year? Is this your first fall garden? Have you always done a fall garden? and let us know like what you've been successful with and what you're hoping to be successful with. As I mentioned, I've had mixed degrees of success with my fall gardening. I've usually been pretty successful with things like kale and lettuce. I kind of tend to wait a little bit too long most years for things like broccoli, cauliflower, and snap peas. But I am hoping to rectify that this year and finally have some success. I think that now more than ever, I think it's more important to be able to have a reliable source of food. Now, as I mentioned, as the fall gardening season gets closer, we will talk more about direct sowing, but now is definitely the time to start planning your fall garden if you have not done that already. All right, guys, so I hope you're having a great summer garden. I know as we're talking about fall today, we kind of forget about all the stuff that's really going full steam right now in the garden for summer. And that's like this kind of stuff that we're really excited about right now. Like I said, I haven't got my first tomato yet, and so I'm really looking forward to that. But despite that, I am still planning my fall garden. I think it's easier for me to plan ahead when it comes to the summer garden because you kind of start that in like late winter, early spring when it's cold and not very nice outside and you're just kind of wanting something summery to do. It's a little bit harder with the fall garden because you're already doing all that fun stuff outside, enjoying the weather outside, and you have a garden going. So it's a little bit harder with the fall garden. But the thing is, every year that I plan ahead and do something like that, I am always so thankful that I did. Just having that fresh harvest as the days get shorter and colder, there's something really comforting about that. And so I hope that you will plan ahead. I hope that you will grow a fall garden. If you haven't done it before, I hope that you will try it for the first time. I mean, I think it's really important to try things. I tend to be someone who does a lot of research. I like to really read and research and just make sure I'm making the right decision before I jump into something. I find that I learn most by just doing it. And I hope that you'll give fall gardening a try too. Let me know in the comments what your favorite thing to grow in the fall garden is and what you're really excited to try this fall. All right, guys, I hope you're having a great day. I hope that your summer harvests and summer gardens are going well and that you're still ready to plan your fall garden. All right, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye. See you next time.